Blog Talk Radio.
It's time for Voice of Indie. Your hosts today are Beem Weeks, author, producer, and marketing monster for independent multimedia publisher Fresh Ink Group, and Stephen Gies, author, producer, composer, and publisher for Fresh Ink Group.
Good evening. Welcome to episode number 3 of the Voice of Indie podcast. I am one of your hosts, Beem Weeks, and I am broadcasting live from Lansing, Michigan. And my co-host this evening is Stephen Gies. How you doing, Stephen?
Hey, Beem. I'm doing great. I'm kind of liking this podcast format. I have a background in TV, and I get to sit here wearing my Hey, We're the Monkeys t-shirt, send the hair and makeup people home, and just relax and enjoy the show, learn about books, learn about authors, have a good time. Now, listeners, get out there on Twitter and use the hashtag Fresh Ink Group. If you want to post a comment for us, that's fine. And tonight, we're going to start taking phone calls, too. So write this number down, 516-453-9902. That's in the United States, 516-453-9902. Beem?
All right. This open bumper here, I think we've got 2 of them because this one didn't fade. I had to fade it on my own, but, we'll have to grab the other one and get rid of this one. Ronald E. Yates, many of you who know me know him. We worked in some of the same circles together. Ronald E. Yates is a multi-award-winning author of historical fiction and action-adventure novels, including the popular and award-winning Finding Billy Battles trilogy. His extraordinarily accurate books have captivated fans from around the world who applaud his ability to blend fact and fiction. Before turning to fiction, Ron was an award-winning foreign correspondent for the Chicago Tribune and Professor Emeritus of Journalism at the University of Illinois, where he was also the Dean of the College of Media. So with that, welcome to the show, Ron. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Beem. It's great to be here, both of you, Beem and Stephen. Great to be with you.
Great to have you.
Well, Ron, we kind of touched on your bio there. If you would like to fill in the blank spaces there, some of our listeners may not know who you are. I'm guessing many of them do because, like I said, we've traveled in the same circles, but go ahead and fill in the blanks.
Well, you did a pretty good job of laying it out there. I don't want to embellish too much, but I spent most of my life as a foreign correspondent. That's the bulk of my writing life has been as a journalist, and that was working with the Chicago Tribune in Asia and Latin America, and going back to all the way back to the 70s, late 70s or the mid 70s, when I covered the fall of Saigon in 1975, and I was about 12 when that happened, and not really, but anyway.
That's not what you said off the air.
Where do I buy some of that?
But about 1975, I covered the fall of Saigon, and then I spent a lot of time in Asia, roaming around, covering all kinds of mayhem, and then they sent me down. I became like the Tribune's war and mayhem correspondent. They sent me back. I came back to the States, and then they had me go to South America. I spent a lot of time covering the revolutions in Central and South America, Guatemala, in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and those were nasty little wars. And then I went back out to Asia again, and was in Tokyo for about 8 or 9 years, and covering China. Was in Tiananmen Square in 1989 when the Chinese Communist Party came into the square and murdered thousands of students and demonstrators. Witnessed that, and survived it, and mostly then I came back to the States and became an editor with the Chicago Tribune, and then after doing that for a while, I became a senior writer and was working on the editorial board, writing editorials, and then I decided I wanted to leave. I felt like I'd written the stories over and over again. I was writing the same stories again and again. I thought, no, this is not good. So I left and I wrote a book, working with McGraw-Hill. They were my publisher, and I wrote a book about Japan's Kikkoman Corporation, kind of a corporate biography. And after that came out, I got a call from the University of Illinois asking me if I'd like to come down and maybe join the faculty as a professor, and I did. And they brought me in as a full professor with tenure, which is really kind of unusual.
Wow.
And so I came in that way and became department head of the Department of Journalism. And then when the dean left from the college, which included the Department of Journalism, Department of Advertising, a bunch of other schools, and also the WILL AM FM TV, which is the NPR PBS affiliate for Central Illinois, which was part of the college. The provost called and asked me to become the dean of the college, and that's when I really began to understand what warfare was all about. When you're on a university campus like Illinois, you're fighting for every penny, and my college was not one of the biggest ones, and so I had to do a lot of fighting and scrapping for money. And after about 8 years of that, I think I escaped and came out to California, where I managed to survive. I survived academia, which I think was more difficult than surviving war and covering war in Vietnam and El Salvador. And that's kind of it.
Perhaps we can touch on some of that as we move along to the show today, because you've had an extraordinary career. I'm familiar with some of your stories, and it's just I'm in awe of some of the things that you've done.
Well, I'm just happy to be alive.
Yeah, we understand that you saw some very vivid things in Tiananmen Square. Can you touch on that for a little bit?
Sure. I'd gone in. Actually, I was based in Tokyo when this happened, and our Beijing correspondent was overwhelmed. It was the beginning of middle of May, and so he called and said, "Can you come over and help?" And I said, "Sure." So I jumped on a plane, flew over, and got there in mid-May. And as I went to the square, every day you go to the square, and it was just, it's the largest public square in the world, supposedly. I think it's what everybody says it is. It's enormous, just enormous. And there were probably in that square close to 100,000 people, and camped out in tents and lean-tos and whatever. Students, mostly students. They come from all over China. And, they erected this big, what they call the statue of sort of like a freedom. It looked like the Statue of Liberty, kind of their version of it, made out of paper mache. It was very tall, very big, and it was looking straight at the countenance of Mao Zedong, who was, his face was on the wall of the Forbidden City, looking out on the square. And that was probably the last straw. The Chinese Communist Party couldn't abide that. And after several weeks of threatening the students, and the students trying to negotiate some kind of a withdrawal from the square, it just didn't go anywhere. And then one evening on the 3rd of June, the evening of the 3rd of June, I was writing a story in the hotel on Jinghua Boulevard, and all of a sudden I heard all this shooting, and I ran back up. I rode my bicycle. People didn't drive cars in Beijing in 1989, very few cars. So I jumped on my bike and rode to the square and got there just in time to see people being shot. And it was pretty brutal, pretty nasty. And they were taking students who were wounded and the dead, taking them to hospitals, and it was just awful. It was just a massacre. And I thought to myself, boy, if this party, this Communist Party, can do this to its own people, what kind of a country will this be if they remain in control? Well, I think now we're beginning to see what kind of a country it can be. look what they did with the coronavirus. You know, they unleashed this thing on the rest of the world.
With Tiananmen Square, to this day, in China, if you Google Tiananmen Square, there's nothing at all about the shootings and the killings. As far as the government's concerned, they didn't kill anybody. No, that's exactly right. Now, the Chinese Red Cross estimated at least 4,000 dead. But a British ambassador, who was the ambassador at the time, he had sent a highly classified document back to London in which they had better information. And his information came directly from a source within the Chinese Communist Party who was upset with what was going on. And this person in the Chinese Communist Party said about 10,000 people were killed. Now, they weren't all in the square. A lot of people who were killed were outside of the square in neighborhoods, and they had put buses and set buses in the streets to keep the tanks and to keep the army from coming into the square. And so there was a lot of fighting taking place before the army even got to the square. And of course, the army with their weapons and their tanks and whatever, they killed a lot of people in these neighborhoods. So a lot of the deaths occurred outside the square. So it was pretty brutal. But if you go, like I say, if you go right now and check you try to find out what happened in China on June 4th, 1989, it's crickets. That's incredible. That's the power of a government, which is a handful of people compared to the population, can keep everybody in the dark like that. That's
right.
And control the people.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, and these things, images like that, I remember I was hiding behind a wall, a low wall, and several students came jumping over the wall. One was a couple of women, and they'd been wounded. One of them was shot in the back, and the other one shot in the arm was half blown off, I think, from a round. And I looked behind me, and there was a guy. The whole area around the square is like a neighborhood. There are all kinds of people who are living behind these walls or walled areas. And this guy was waving at us, and he was a doctor, and he was yelling for us to bring the wounded over, which is what we did. I took those two girls over, and they got help inside of his house. Apparently, he was able to help them a little bit. I'm not sure whatever happened to them, but it was pretty brutal. It was just nasty. And of course, you're trying to protect yourself at the same time, keep your head down, because they're shooting. They were shooting at us, and they were using tracers, which is good and bad. I mean, if a tracer, of course, when a tracer comes at you, well, you know where it came from because you can see it. And so you stay pretty low. And and I had my bicycle. I didn't want to lose my bike because it was the only way to get away if I needed to get away fast. So I kept moving my bike with me and pushing it. And it was just it was a matter of trying to cover the story, take notes, watch what was happening, and then try to survive at the same time. It was all three things combined. So it was one of those things you just never forget, frankly.
Did you have any kind of marking or anything on you to show that you were a journalist, or would that have even mattered?
It wouldn't have mattered. And no, I had nothing like that. In fact, we were warned not to even be near the square. Journalists who went to the square, they said we're liable to be arrested. So we didn't even want to be identified as journalists because they might have tried to arrest us.
Now, with all of these hot spots that you've been in around the world, with Tiananmen Square, the fall of Saigon, a lot of the stuff that went down in Central and South America, what is PTSD an issue with you? I mean, does this affect you on that kind of a level?
It might have at one point, but I tell you, working as a journalist or as a correspondent, at least for me, I can't speak for other journalists who've covered war. But what I found in that, if I saw something really horrible, and I saw enough horrible stuff, I found that by writing the stories, that was like a catharsis for me. It was a cathartic thing, and it helped me get it out of my system. Getting it down on paper when I was using a typewriter, and then later when I began using laptops, getting it out of my system was very helpful. And then often what happened, Beem, is when you would come back from a story, covering a story like that, you would often do a whole series. The Tribune would put you back to Chicago or whatever, and you do a lot of dog and pony shows on television. We would do TV interviews or radio interviews or whatever. And so talking about it also helped. And I kind of just talked it out of my system. But, I remember having dreams about stuff, waking up in the middle of the night thinking about stuff or envisioning things I saw. And things that you just can't forget. I mean, war there's nothing pleasant about it, and there's nothing that when you do cover it. And of course, I think maybe what might have helped me a little bit is that I spent 4 years in the Army, so I knew something about warfare, and I knew something about weapons and things like that. So, and I had been kind of trained in that area, and I don't know. I mean, all that combined, I think, was helpful. But in terms of really tough PTSD, no, I don't think I've ever really had that.
Okay.
Everybody, you're listening to the Voice of Indie, Fresh Ink Group, indie publisher Fresh Ink Group's weekly podcast every Wednesday evening, and our guest today is Ronald E. Yates. Right now, we want to do a quick mention that Fresh Ink Group is holding contests for short stories and short mini memoirs to be published in our upcoming anthologies. We have a roll-in for that, Beem?
We do.
Writers, got a short story looking for a prestigious anthology that will showcase your work alongside other top authors? Or maybe you've experienced a moment worth sharing, perhaps with some poignant meaning we could all appreciate? Fresh Ink Group is accepting submissions for our second and third volumes of the Fresh Ink Group Short Story Showcase to be released worldwide in hardcover, softcover, and all ebook formats. There are no fees to enter. Winners are not only published, but are eligible to become members of Fresh Ink Group with your own dashboard in the FreshInkGroup.com website. Head on over to FreshInkGroup.com's Contest tab to learn more. Then grease up the old Underwood and get those shorts down on parchment so you can get your entries in sooner than later. And you readers, discover 49 wondrous tales already released in the Fresh Ink Group Short Story Showcase #1, available in all formats worldwide.
All right, so keep that in mind, everybody. It's a great opportunity, whether you're a published author, an unpublished author, just getting started, or you've written hundreds of short stories. Just a great opportunity here.
And remember, Ron, head on over to Twitter, #Fresh Ink Group, if you want to leave a question for Ron.
Oh yeah,
I love what you said there, Stephen. Grease up your Underwood. I have one. I have an Underwood sitting, and it's sitting right here, and it's huge. It weighs about 20 pounds, I think, or whatever. It's a big old monster. But I used to pound the hell out of it, and those keys could take a tremendous amount of punishment. And when I went to the computer, I had to stop doing that because I was ruining my keyboards all the time.
My first typewriter in college was the first electric Underwood, and that thing never worked. I'd get halfway through a paper and it would be over till IBM Selectric. That's what saved me.
Oh, I didn't get that. I never got to use an electric typewriter, but I did take a portable Olivetti with me all the time when I went on the road, and those were nice. Little blue case. Yep. And that took a lot of punishment. It was all metal, I didn't want any plastic because I was jumping on and off of helicopters and stuff in Vietnam and whatever, and I didn't want to be landing and discovering my typewriter was broken, So anyway, now that's I love that. Grease up the old Underwood. I love it.
And the kids today, those under 20, under 30, might not even know what a typewriter is.
You're probably right. Yeah, I don't know if they don't know what it is. I realized just how old I was when I was teaching at the University of Illinois and talking about this stuff that we just talked about. To those kids sitting in front of me, it was ancient history. I could have been talking about World War I as far as they were concerned, For me, it's like yesterday.
they have these videos on YouTube where like parents will shoot these videos of watching their kids trying to make a phone call on a rotary dial phone, and these kids have no clue how it works. Those are some funny videos.
I love it.
Well, Ron, you've kind of filled us in on your bio. What have you been up to lately? How you holding up?
I'm holding up well. I mean, everybody is, sheltering in place like everybody else. I go out quite a bit. We live in hills around Murrieta, California, which is in the Southern California wine country, and so my wife and I get out and we walk the streets, and we in our neighborhood it's very hilly, so we're going up and down these hills. And believe me, I'm not wearing a mask when I'm out there doing that. But when I go out other places, and we meet friends, and we go have here in California there are a lot of places you can sit outside, and so we go and have we meet friends and sit outside and have a drink or eat dinner together or have lunch. And when you're sitting outside, they don't require you to have a mask here in California, so that works out pretty well. But I'll be happy when this COVID stuff is over. This is awful.
I hear you. That's the thing of it is it just seems like it just keeps going and going, and they keep throwing on all of these new things. Oh, well, we didn't think it could do that, but now it's doing this. And I don't know. At a point, it's come on, let's push through this, be done with it, and go back to living.
I agree with you. I think probably. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not an issue and that it's not a dangerous thing, but it's think about when people are dying of the flu, and that's like 70 or 80,000 people a year in this country. We're not wearing masks. We're not telling people, no, you can't come into our restaurant. I mean, people are walking around coughing and hacking, and they've got fevers, and nobody's checking them, and nobody's doing testing and all that stuff. I think it's just gone almost to the extreme. But I do understand. For example, I really feel very sorry. I've got 4 grandkids, and 2 of them are right near us. They can't go to school. It's horrible. These poor kids. I think it's terrible for the children, and they're going to miss out on a year of schooling, number one, and then they're not being socialized anymore. They're sitting at home. A lot of children are undergoing, they're not in the best home environments. Some of these kids are being abused. They're not being fed. Some of these kids the best meal they got was the one they got in school, for lunch. So that's an issue to me. I think it's I'm not sure which is worse, the disease or the cure.
Yeah. I've got a whole gaggle of nieces and nephews, especially through my little brother. He was quite prolific at the kids. And now I've got grand nieces and nephews that are just starting in school, kindergarten, first grade, and then there's some preschoolers in there, and they had just started getting involved in that, and then it's like can't do it anymore, and so they're all bummed out. But what have you been doing to keep yourself busy during this time?
Well, writing. I finished the trilogy. Well, that's been about a year and a half ago that I finally finished that, and I thought, well, do I want to do a spin-off of the trilogy with a couple of the characters, or do I want to do something completely different, as John Cleese used to say on Faulty Towers? But
and in Python.
And in Python.
Monty Python.
Now for something
completely different. Right. But anyway, I decided to do something very different, and I began writing I actually began writing this book back in the 90s, and I just stopped it for some reason. I don't know, I just got tired of it, and I put it aside and didn't do anything with it. Luckily, I didn't erase it from my computer, and several months ago, I was going through my computer and I found it again. So I pulled it out and I thought, not half bad. So I started rewriting it and been doing some things with it. And so now it's a book about foreign correspondence, naturally, in Asia. And it's a little bit of, it's all fiction, of course, nothing factual in it, except for some of the thoughts and ideas about being a correspondent that my characters espouse. It's got a little bit of sci-fi in it because it deals with something that's happening in a part of New Guinea Western New Guinea, which is a very, very wild place. There's a big forest area called the Foa Mountains that are almost totally unexplored, one of the last unexplored areas of this of our planet. And these journalists, something is happening there. I'm not going to get into all of it, but something is there, and it's been detected, and they're going to go try to figure out what it is. And that's where I am right now. I'm trying to write the end of the book, and I should have it done in about another month and a half. I should be finished. It's called, by the way, I have a name for it. It's just a working title, but I think it's probably going to be the main title. It's called Asia Hands. And somebody who's a hand, like in journalism, if you're an Asia hand, that means you are a journalist who understands Asia, who has been working in Asia. So, Asia Hands, a tale of foreign correspondents and other miscreants in the Orient. That's the working title.
Good title.
And the blurb is: a mysterious object of unknown origin hidden in the heart of an impenetrable Southeast Asian jungle. A covert alliance of dangerous people determined to keep it concealed. Treacherous secret agents, betrayal, assassination, murder. It's one hell of a story, and two foreign correspondents, one recently retired and the other approaching burnout, are on the scent. Meet Cooper McGrath and Clayton Brandt. They have just stumbled upon the biggest story of their lives, one that could have staggering ramifications for the planet and its people. Now all they have to do is live long enough to tell it. Will they meet their deadlines, or will they meet their deaths? That's the blurb.
Wow. Do you have a cover yet?
Not yet. That's something I got to do. What?
What are you picturing?
I don't know. It's a good question. Something journalistic, I guess. I don't know exactly how to do it, but
an old Underwood.
Yeah, that's one way to do it.
I was just going to suggest that.
Well, it begins. Here's the thing. It actually begins in 1990. That's where the story begins. So, I could actually have a computer. I could actually have a laptop, because I had a laptop back then, and I used it a lot. I mean, I used computers since the early. I mean, Tribune gave me my first computer in the early 80s. And then I had a Radio Shack.
Yeah, the TRS.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember those.
With a little 3-inch screen.
Yeah.
I had that too. Did you have the Commodore 64?
My little brother did.
Did he? Oh, wow.
Yeah, my little brother had it. He was one of the first ones to get a Commodore 64. It was all for video games, so he was into the games back then big time. So I'm seeing over on Twitter, we actually have a comment from Ronnie Deshay. She says, hi, Beem and Steven. Great show so far. I'm enjoying listening to Ron. So,
well, that's great. And Ronnie, I haven't talked to. I mean, I always liked listening to Ronnie when she was on when she did her little thing on her little podcast. But well, I'm glad she's calling in.
We'll have her on here before too long.
Great, that'd be great. I'll tune in for that.
Yeah.
She's always got good things to say, and she's always funny.
All right, we're going to take another quick little break here and talk about one of our authors, Tammy Trover. She was a cancer survivor, currently in the process of moving from Denver, Colorado to Washington State. But she had a tough time with cancer, and she also had experiences with young people and children who were dealing with cancer, or who had friends who were dealing with it too. So she decided she was going to start a book series for young people and families to share together to learn about different topics. And the first one is the ABCs of Surviving Cancer. Beem?
All right.
Cornelius is our cancer fighter. He's here to make our days much brighter. It's his job to help you know you're never alone wherever you go. Cornelius will guide and show you too. So let's fight the fire of cancer in you. A is for alive, that's what I am. This is my story and how it began. When cancer came in and changed my days, changed my thoughts, and changed my ways. Hi everybody, my name is Tammy, and like so many of you around the world, I too am a cancer survivor. I wrote the ABCs of surviving cancer, alive, beautiful, and courageous, for people of all ages. My book is fun, informative, and most of all, heartfelt. It's a way to give confidence to young people, as well as families and friends, to educate those who know a young person facing the challenge of cancer, and to bring everybody together with empathy and understanding. This book is beautifully illustrated. The ABCs of Surviving Cancer guides us through the alphabet with a 16-line poem for every letter. Some of the topics include C is for courageous, H for hope, J for joy, O for own it, P for patience, T for truth, V for victory, and Y for you. Join me in this journey of reassurance and understanding, and share it with the people you love. The ABCs of Surviving Cancer is available in hardcover, softcover, and popular ebook editions such as iBook, Kindle, and Nook. Order yours through every major bookseller worldwide or through my website, tammytrover.com. The ABCs of Surviving Cancer is proudly published by the Fresh Ink Group.
In case you didn't get that name, that's tammytrover.com, TammyTrover.com, and you can get books directly from Tammy, or of course, like she said, they're available everywhere.
Yeah, and this is actually a really good book. If you have know somebody who's young, a child that's dealing with cancer, even if it's whether it's the child having the cancer or maybe the child knows somebody that's fighting cancer, this is a good tool. So, Ron, here's something that kind of I've always wondered and never had the opportunity to ask you about. The fact that you, all these years that you were a journalist and you dealt with the realities of life, and then you become a fiction writer, but you write historical fiction. And even your Kikkoman book is the history of this corporation. Are you like a history buff?
Oh, I love history. Yeah, it's one of the things. When I was in school, I hated math, loved history. And
same here.
And and unfortunately, and this is really important. If kids have good history teachers when they're in middle school or in junior high or high school, that is so important. And I was very fortunate. I had people teaching history who loved it and who taught it in a way that made it alive. It wasn't just memorizing dates and who was the king of this country and this date and what battle was fought here and there. There was a way that they taught it that just brought it alive to me, and I just became so enamored with it that I every book I bought, and of course I was growing up in Kansas at the time, and because history was I was growing up in a state which is steeped in a lot of history, especially Western history, and I became very interested in that, and that was very helpful to me when I began writing this my trilogy, because a lot of things I talk about in the books actually happened, and they were real events. Some of them are real events, and so that was learning history and learning to appreciate how you can use it, how you can use the past to influence what you're writing today, and to think about the future. To me, that just was an exciting thing, and I guess I became kind of a history buff or a nut, whichever.
Yeah. So did you do a lot of research when doing the Billy Battle stuff? Go pour through old history books and things like that?
Oh, you're not kidding. You know, all 3 books in the trilogy required a ton of research. I mean, obviously, I wasn't around in the 19th century. I'm not quite that old, or the early part of the 20th century either. I'm not that old either. So I had to spend a lot of time researching these eras. And well, of course, you know, you heard I'm a reporter by training, and as such, I was always concerned with accuracy. So in writing the first 2 books, or the 3 books of the trilogy, actually, I really dove deeply into the time periods that I was writing about. For example, I found old Santa Fe Railroad timetables, so I knew exactly how long a train trip would take between Lawrence, Kansas, and Dodge City, Kansas. And you know, I did the same thing with book 2 because Billy is on a ocean liner in 1894, the SS China, which was a real ship. And he's on his way to Asia. And it was a real ship, and I learned as much as I could about it, how fast it could travel, what route it took to the Far East, how long it took, and all that, and how fast it could go. So, I mean, that was all part of it. And because I really believe, and I think anybody who writes any kind of well, you did it, Beem. You wrote a historical novel about, you know, the very first book that you wrote, right? So
yeah, Jazz
deals
Baby.
with Jazz Baby deals with a young girl in the 20s, right? So
yeah, and yeah, that took a lot of research. I had an old high school history book that was the main part of my research, but then there were some other books that were involved in there as well. Because, like you said, you want it to be accurate. In fact, with Jazz Baby, there was one scene that I had written where they were driving over the bridge over the Mississippi, going into Louisiana, into New Orleans, and they're listening to the radio, and they're singing along to these songs. And then I see where this was set in 1925, and I see where radios didn't become standard on cars until 1931, I believe it was. They
That's
had
right,
some
Motorola.
as early as they had some as early as 1929, but those were highly costly, and most people didn't have them. So I rewrote that scene, and it actually turned out better because they had a poignant conversation. Instead of singing a song, listening to the radio, they had this conversation that actually opened the door to another scene that I hadn't envisioned.
Wow.
But, you know, going back to talking about when you said having good history teachers when you're in junior high and high school and middle school, that really helps out. I can tell you that is the absolute truth. I had a couple of really exceptional history teachers, and to this day, I can answer these questions on Jeopardy. And I'll sit there, and it's because of these history classes, something that I remember in history, and it pops into my head from Mr. Cook at Lansing Eastern High School on the Civil War, or, you know, whatever. Boom, there's that. I remember that because he made it fun. He made it interesting. So I listened and I absorbed that.
No, it's so true, you know, and anybody who writes historical accuracy when writing historical fiction is really critical, and that may sound like a paradox, but it's not, because a critical element in writing historical fiction is the way people communicate with one another, how they used to talk. And you want to make sure your characters, if they're in the 19th century, as mine are when the Finding Billy Battles trilogy begins, that they're using the correct, lingua franca, I guess you could say. You don't want your protagonists and antagonists using 21st century colloquial speech or slang in 1880s Kansas, you know. And, you know, it happens. I see movies, and I hear people saying things that they didn't say these things back in the 1880s, you know. And for one thing, that destroys a sense of time and place. And for another, it reveals to the reader that the author has not researched the era enough, or is maybe too lazy to learn or to employ the vernacular of the time. And I think that's a mistake that you see in all kinds of movies. For example, if a character in a book set in the 19th century says, "This sucks," or are you nuts? You know, or "Give me a break." No. And Jesse James said, "Hey, this sucks. You know, they're shooting at us. You know, please."
Well, you know, I might be wrong, but that's a trend that I think I've kind of noticed over my lifetime. When I was young, I'd watch a historical movie or read a historical story, and all the inaccuracies bothered me. But I think now that there's enough people in the audiences out there who demand that the details be correct, and will take to social media and tear something apart if they're all wrong, that I think there is a lot more motivation for writers now to make that effort, to get that right, and to make the verisimilitude something that everybody can just get sucked into the story and believe they're really in that time and place.
Mm-hmm. You know, they remade Ben-Hur about 3 or 4 years ago, and so I looked at it. I was watching this new. I thought, oh, maybe it's an improvement upon the old, Charlton Heston version. It wasn't, but at any rate, the new Ben-Hur film said during this very climatic chariot race. You know, the chariot race, that was the climax of the whole movie, the whole book actually, and you have Masala. And he's shouting at Judah Ben-Hur. He says, and they're going around the ring and they're whacking each other with their whips and everything. He says, "Are we having fun yet, brother? You know, please." They didn't say that in Rome, for God's sake. Give me a break. And I that's another word. They wouldn't have said that either. Give me a break. You know, give me a break. They didn't do that, and I think that really destroys the whatever sense you're trying to bring your readers with you into this time period. Exactly, yeah. And this just throws it's like throwing a shoe at their head, you know. Whack,
I think the one that really got me scratching my head was this the latest The Great Gatsby movie, when they had for the soundtrack Jay-Z rap for a movie set in the 20s. I didn't even bother with that movie. I don't know if they played the rap music throughout the movie, but just seeing that, it was just like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah, and the other thing is descriptions. You know, you want to make sure you're describing everything properly. I mean, in the trilogy, once again, I had to describe the Kansas towns of Lawrence and Dodge City. Well, I'd been to both of those places, and I went to school in Lawrence because that's where the University of Kansas is. That's where I went to school. And Dodge City, I'd been there many times, as well as Denver, Colorado, where he is also. So I had to use the Kansas Historical Society to find these old maps of Lawrence and Dodge City. And I found old plot maps of the city, the way they looked at a certain time, so I could actually say what the streets were.
I did that with Jazz Baby.
Yeah, I mean, you
have used an old New Orleans map.
Right. I mean, and I tell you, the feedback you get is really interesting because I see on Amazon when somebody will review the books or whatever, they'll say, "I was really impressed with the historical accuracy of this book," you know, and people say, "I wish they would have taught history like this in school," you know, which that was the greatest compliment I've ever gotten, I think, you know. But you know, they appreciate the effort, and they all realize they can tell how much research you've done if you've done it well and you're being accurate, and that's really what's important. And that's just, I'm anal about that because of my background in journalism, I guess. But I think you are too, Beem, because I know how you. I read your book. Yeah.
I want it to be like you said. I want to transport people back to that time period. I want to go back to that time period when I'm writing it. So,
I tell you, when I to go back to the very beginning of the very first book, where and the Finding Billy battles, the very first book of the trilogy, Billy Battles meets his great grandson, Ted Sales, on the veranda of the Wadsworth Old Soldiers Home. Okay, why did I put the book there? Why did I use that particular setting? Well, because when I was working for the Kansas City Star as a student, I mean, I was in college at the time, and I worked summers. I was an intern. They had me go to Wadsworth Old Soldiers Home to interview a 98-year-old Spanish-American War veteran.
Wow.
Who had served in the Philippines. And I sat on the veranda and I interviewed him. And I thought to myself at the time, this is amazing. I thought to myself at the time, this would be a great way to start a book. And that's how I did it. I mean, I used this exact setting that I actually experienced myself and started my book that way, the trilogy. Because he meets his 98-year-old great-grandfather sitting on the veranda of the Wadsworth Old Soldiers Home, which is still there, by the way, in Leavenworth, Kansas.
That's incredible. Spanish-American War. What did you talk about with this gentleman?
Well, I loved history, so I said I had no idea. I said, I thought the Spanish-American War was fought in Cuba. He says, oh, no, most of it was fought in the Philippines. And I said, what? I had no idea. But he was right. Most of the Spanish-American War was fought. In fact, we went to the war. American troops came to the Philippines in 1898. We didn't leave until 1902. That was our very first Vietnam. And we wound up killing hundreds of thousands of Filipinos because they wanted us to leave and we wouldn't leave. And there was a guerrilla warfare going on. And that's where the whole idea of the water torture, what they call the waterboarding, that's where it began. The Americans used it on Filipinos. I mean, there's a lot of stuff Americans don't realize, but that's where that was the very first war that America fought outside of the Western Hemisphere.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, and see, when you do the research, I mean, you dig around, you become educated.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff.
And that's one of the things people always get back to me about. They say, I had no idea that the war was fought in the Philippines like that, and
I think
it was.
I think with that Spanish-American War, you always hear about Remember the Maine and Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders down in Cuba. So that's why we tend to
San Juan Hill.
San Juan Hill, yeah. Stephen, what have you got for us?
Well, we're talking to Ronald E. Yates, a journalist, professor, dean, and writer extraordinaire. We also have a roll-in now for a book called Operation Ivy Bells, a Mac McDowell mystery. This is written by our author, Robert G. Williscroft. He's primarily a science fiction and thriller writer. This particular series, Mac McDowell, he's an officer in charge of submarines. And we're getting ready to release his second book, Operation Icebreaker, should be in stores this weekend. So let's hear about Operation Ivy Bells.
Now, from Fresh Ink Group and best-selling author Robert G. Williscroft, Operation Ivy Bells, a Mac McDowell mission. An update of the popular bestseller now launching the Mac McDowell Mission series. Saturation Dive Team Officer in Charge Mac McDowell faces the greatest challenge yet, leading his team into a critical Cold War mission of counter-Soviet espionage and proving what brave men can achieve under real pressure, the kind that will steal your air and crush the life out of you. Operation Ivy Bells is proudly published in hardcover, softcover, and all ebook formats by the Fresh Ink Group.
All right.
That sounds like a winner.
Yeah. We do have a comment on Twitter, another one from Ronnie Deshay, so I'll throw that out here. And she says, "Hi, Ron," waving. "I love reading historical fiction, but can't write it. Research is not my friend. LOL. If I have to research it, I won't write it." Well, that's some of my favorite parts of putting together a story.
Yeah, that's the fun.
I love it. I really love it. In fact, sometimes when I was writing this trilogy, I would get so deeply involved in the research that I'd spend a day and a half just doing research and not even doing any writing, and I thought to myself, this is going overboard. I got to be careful, because you can go overboard, with historical fiction. You can put so much history into the book that you lose the thread of the story, and you don't want that to happen,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm guessing.
So what's the most fun that you had discovering something that really interested you that you really didn't know was out there once you started doing your research?
Well, I think what I found interesting is when I was dealing with for the second book, actually, where Billy winds up going to Asia and spending a lot of time there. I learned a lot about what was because he goes to what was then called French Indochina when the French had taken over what is now Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and we're pretty much running those places. A lot of French people came to that part of the world, and you would think, everybody thinks that they all came and began getting involved in the rubber industry. Well, that was not the case. What they got involved in was growing coffee and growing here. What I really found interesting, they began growing black pepper, and Vietnam became the biggest exporter of black pepper in the 19th century.
Wow.
And and black pepper was a very expensive and a very valued commodity. People wanted it all over the world, and the only place you could get it was in India or Vietnam, and it had to be shipped out of there. So this one of my characters in the book has several black pepper plantations, and the whole process of harvesting it and how it works, and and the value of it and how valuable it was. It was fascinating to me. These little things, I had no idea. As I was doing the research, I just began to uncover this stuff. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and I got so deeply involved in it. I thought, my God, this is really fascinating. I had no idea. And those kinds of things, I love to uncover stuff like that. It's sort of maybe the reporter in me, you're uncovering a good story, the same kind of a thing.
Wow. Your book credits list Nicole Yates as your illustrator. Can you tell us about Nicole?
Nicole is my youngest daughter. She's a graphic designer. She's works up in Portland. She lives in Portland. I'm very sorry to say, I feel sorry for her living up in Portland, given what's going on up there. But she has two of my grandkids and her husband, and she is a creative director at an advertising agency up there. But she's also a graphic designer. And so I said, Nicole, would you do the covers for my trilogy? And she said, if you didn't ask me, I'd be really upset. I said, okay, good. I'm asking you. So she did them. And I don't know what's going to happen with the third book or this book I'm working on right now. I don't know yet how that's going to work because she's pretty busy. She's also a fine artist. She does a lot of paintings and stuff and she's got an agent back in New York that sells her stuff for her, which I said, okay, wow. Nicole, now that you're doing so well, I'm really going to retire and come up there and you can take care of me the rest of my life. How's that? She's doing pretty well. But if I can get her to do the next cover, I'll have her do it. But if she doesn't want to do it, I understand. Not a problem. You guys do covers.
I was just going to say, keep in mind, Fresh Ink Group does some pretty nice covers.
Yeah, I've seen them. They look really good. Some good ones. And also, I like the trailers you guys do. So those are all nice. Yeah.
Well, we're doing audio books now, too, and we're adding sound effects, background music, and things like that, too, so that they're more than just readers. So we're having a lot of fun with multimedia.
Audio books, yeah. That's fascinating. That's an area I haven't gotten into yet.
Yeah, we were just working on one this evening just before we got into the studio. Sound effects, music, all this cool stuff to kind of set the tone, to set the mood, and they really work.
Who does the reading? I mean, do you guys have people who do that for you, or do you do it yourself? We hire professional voiceover artists. This is what they do for a living, and they're good. Wow, that's something I'd like to check into.
You'll hear some of them in our book trailers as well, like with the trailer for Strange Highway. We needed somebody that kind of sounded like Rod Serling doing the Twilight Zone, and Mr. G's here found a guy, and man, he knocked it out of the park.
He sounds like Rod Serling.
He's got that tone, and the cadence of his reading. It's Rod Serling.
Are you okay?
That is fascinating. Because that'd be something I'd like to check into. I was thinking about doing that with the trilogy, but I know it can be a very expensive proposition. So I don't know how. I have to check into that.
Well, a lot of these productions that are done through like Amazon and ACX are where they share royalties with people, and then they contribute to it or whatever. But what we've been doing is just trying to keep the cost as low as possible, and producing it so that our authors own their audiobooks when they're done. They can do anything they want with them. And
Good
it's
idea.
not as expensive as you might think. You know, if we've got some good narrators. But let's talk some more about Ronald E. Yates and what kind of presence do you have online? You got a website? You got places people can find you?
Absolutely. I have it's called Ronald Yates Books, and it's my my website. And you just have to you type in ronaldyatesbooks.com, and you'll find it. It's right there. And I usually that website has information about books. I also have a blog that's part of that website. I do blogging, and I talk about writing in my blog. Sometimes I get a little political, but not often, but sometimes I do. So there might be some political stuff on occasion in there. I might rant a little bit. I really rant a lot about the media because I'm really disturbed about what's happening to the news media in our country. And it bothers me a lot because I spent a large portion of my life working in that world. And it was at a time when we really took our work seriously, and we were very serious about trying to be as objective as possible, which we all know is not possible because, after all, we're subjective human beings. But nevertheless, we were trying to be very fair and balanced, and I find that's not the case today. I find it's really terrible that the media has devolved into some kind of huge propaganda arm, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all, and I think it's hurting. People don't feel they can trust it anymore, and that's really important. If you don't have the trust of your readers, then what do you have? You have nothing.
Yeah, I steer clear of it. I get my news through different sources. I don't usually watch it on TV anymore. But yeah, you talked about ranting on your blog. I don't. I tried to stay as neutral as possible on my blog. That way I've got both sides in my audience, and I love having people in my audience.
You're smart. You're smart.
Yeah.
I shouldn't. I try to. I really. It just bothers me about the media, and that's where I get.
Oh yeah, yeah. I see that too. Now, before we run out of time here, we're down to about 2.5 minutes.
Wow.
Stephen, you want to give a shout out to Harmony Kent on her blog tour?
I always want to give a shout out to Harmony Kent. Harmony Kent's one of our favorite authors. She's a former Buddhist monk and all-around person with a wicked sense of humor over in the United Kingdom. And she's got a new book coming out that's written from prompts. It's called Interludes 2. And it's got 10 stories. The first one 1,000 words, second 2,000, third 3,000, on up to 10,000 words. And these are very steamy, erotic romance. And I've read a little bit of it, and Harmony has some fun with it, but she's also very serious and very intense. And these are very interesting stories. But at any rate, her book, Interludes 2, is available for pre-sale now. We want to urge people to go out there to your favorite bookseller and take a look at that, see about ordering that, and maybe her first Interludes book as well. Beem, you want to mention her blog tour and where to find her?
Yeah, here's 2 of them. You can go to StephenG's.com, StephenG's.com. She's over there, and BeamWeeks.wordpress.com. Again, BeamWeeks.wordpress.com, and you can stop over there. And before we run out of time, Ronald E. Yates, it has been a true pleasure having you on the show with us tonight, and we do hope that that you had fun, and you might even want to come back again.
Absolutely. I'll be back. Anytime you ask me, I'll come back.
We would be thrilled.
And as always, thank you, Stephen, for making this a great show as well.
Thank you both also for having me. Appreciate it.
One last mention for you, Ron. Can people find you on Twitter or Facebook or other places as well?
They can find me on Twitter and Amazon and Facebook. I have a Facebook authors page and a Twitter account, and also they go to Amazon and type in my name, and they'll go right to my authors page.
Terrific.
All right.
Yep.
That wraps it up. We got to get out of here. Thanks for joining in, everybody, and have a good
Ron.
night.
Okay, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been a part of Voice of Indy, a production of Fresh Ink Group. Spread the word, support our guests, then find us at freshinkgroup.com and be sure to hashtag Fresh Ink Group.